Easy Rider, 1969 film made by Dennis Hopper, starring himself and Peter Fonda. Tells the story of two young guys who land a lot of money during a successful drug deal, and they decide to go on this motorcycle trip across the US from Los Angeles to New Orleans to celebrate Mardi Gras there and basically just live their best life spending the money. And as they go, they meet all those different people in different situations along the way, representing some of the major social groups in the US at the time. Now, on the surface, this sounds, and maybe even if you watch it, it looks like a rather simplistic film. The two leads basically just ride along with some stops along the way. But Easy Rider, I think, is a perfect example that art does not exist in a vacuum. The context of the film, painting, poem, whatever it is often crucial to understanding it. And such is the case with this film. For me, the reason I watched it, it was sort of a homework that I've been doing before the new Tarantino film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which comes out next week. So the movie is supposed to be this homage, this love letter to the Hollywood of the 1960s and the dawn of the hippie counterculture that came at the end of the decade with the Manson murders. And I started by listening to a fantastic podcast on the subject. It's called You Must Remember This. And the specific series is called Charles Manson's Hollywood. It has, I think, 12 episodes. And it paints a pretty complete picture of not just the murders themselves, but the times in which they happened, the people involved, even really indirectly, the overall vibe of the time, the zeitgeist of the 1960s. And Easy Rider fits into the picture as the movie that, in 1969, when the summer of love really came crushing down, that put the feel of those times to the screen. It is, I think, a critique overall, but it manages to successfully point out flaws on both sides of the argument. On the one hand, it criticizes the hippie counterculture and shows that it really was unsustainable, that it couldn't exist forever and had to end at one time. And on the other hand, it also shows how unfair the main old American traditional values of the 1950s and people that represented or wanted to represent those values, how they were towards the young people then. How they viewed anything out of the ordinary as something wrong, something that had to be ridiculed and fought, and even feared at some level. Shows the bigotry and the hatefulness of the old generation and points to that as another reason why counterculture ultimately had to go. I think it manages to be at the same time cool but also nostalgic, easygoing but also tragic, full of respect to the subject matter but also full of anger and grief. The anger and grief that very much paved the way for the vastly different Hollywood cinema of the 1970s. And going back to just even the surface level, I think it is almost a perfect moving portrait of America at that time, not just culturally, but even just geographically, in the way that the motorbike rides are shot with the phenomenal soundtrack of classic rock tunes. So I think that Easy Rider would be enjoyable even as just that, as this road trip film. But when you dig deeper and learn the context of the movie, you can really appreciate it so much more for being, I believe, an extremely important American film.